Question 1. Upon reviewing a proposed large-scale commercial development project in Mobile County, Alabama, a land use planner identifies that the project site is adjacent to a known wetland area that serves as a critical habitat for the Alabama red-bellied turtle, a species listed as endangered under the Federal Endangered Species Act. The developer is eager to commence construction promptly. Which of the following approaches represents the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for the land use planner to recommend? Option A. Immediately initiate consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources to assess potential impacts on the Alabama red-bellied turtle and its habitat, and explore the development of a habitat conservation plan if necessary. Option B. Suggest that the developer conduct a brief, informal inquiry with local conservation groups to gauge their concerns, without engaging formal federal or state wildlife agencies. Option C. Advise the developer to proceed with construction while conducting a minimal, on-site visual inspection for the turtles, assuming that the adjacent wetland status as a habitat is unlikely to pose a significant obstacle. Option D. Recommend that the developer focus solely on obtaining all necessary local zoning and permitting approvals from Mobile County, as federal environmental regulations are secondary to local land use authority. The correct answer is A. Immediately initiate consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources to assess potential impacts on the Alabama red-bellied turtle and its habitat, and explore the development of a habitat conservation plan if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between economic development interests and the legal mandate to protect endangered species under the Endangered Species Act, ESSA, as applied in Alabama. Developers often face pressure to proceed quickly, while conservation requirements can introduce delays and increased costs. Navigating these competing interests requires a thorough understanding of federal law and its state-level implications, as well as a commitment to ethical conduct and risk mitigation. Failure to properly address ESA requirements can lead to significant legal penalties, project delays, and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively identifying potential impacts on listed species and their critical habitats early in the planning process. This includes conducting thorough environmental surveys, consulting with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service (USFWS) and the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources (AGNR), and developing a habitat conservation plan (HCP) if necessary. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the requirements of the ESA and its implementing regulations. Section 7 of the ESA mandates consultation for federal actions or actions involving federal permits that may affect listed species. Even for purely intrastate projects, understanding potential impacts and engaging with relevant agencies demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to compliance. An HCP provides a framework for mitigating or offsetting unavoidable impacts, which is a key mechanism under Section 10 of the ESA for obtaining an incidental take permit. This proactive and collaborative strategy minimizes legal risks and fosters a more sustainable development outcome. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with development without any environmental assessment, assuming that the project's scale or location will not impact any endangered species. This is a significant regulatory failure because it ignores the broad applicability of the ESA, which protects species regardless of project size or perceived impact. It bypasses the mandatory consultation requirements and the potential for significant penalties if a listed species or its habitat is later discovered to be affected. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial environmental review that only looks for obvious signs of endangered species, without considering habitat suitability or potential indirect impacts. This approach is flawed because it fails to account for the nuanced requirements of habitat conservation. The ESA protects not only the species themselves, but also their critical habitats, which may be essential for breeding, feeding, or migration. A superficial review risks overlooking these crucial elements, leading to noncompliance. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on local zoning ordinances and ignore federal ESA requirements, believing that state and local regulations are sufficient. This is a critical ethical and regulatory failure. While state and local land use planning laws in Alabama are important, they do not supersede federal law. The ESA is a federal statute that applies nationwide, and failure to comply with its provisions can result in federal enforcement actions, irrespective of compliance with state or local rules. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a risk-based, compliance-first mindset. The decision-making process should begin with a comprehensive understanding of all applicable laws, starting with federal mandates like the ESA. This should be followed by a thorough site-specific assessment, engaging relevant federal and state wildlife agencies early and often. When potential impacts are identified, the focus should shift to mitigation and conservation strategies, such as developing an HCP. Transparency and collaboration with regulatory bodies are paramount to achieving a legally sound and ethically responsible outcome. Question 2. When evaluating a proposed mixed-use development in a rural area of Alabama that borders a historically significant community, what is the most appropriate role for the local government's planning commission in ensuring responsible land use planning? Option A. Approve the project if it meets basic building code requirements, without extensive consideration of its compatibility with the surrounding community or adherence to the long-term vision outlined in the comprehensive plan. Option B. Expedite the review process by focusing primarily on the developer's financial projections and minimizing public engagement to avoid delays. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the proposal against the adopted comprehensive plan, zoning ordinances, and relevant state and local regulations, while actively soliciting public input and considering potential impacts on infrastructure and the environment. Option D. Prioritize the approval of the project based on its potential to significantly increase the municipality's tax base, assuming economic benefits outweigh other considerations. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the proposal against the adopted comprehensive plan, zoning ordinances, and relevant state and local regulations, while actively soliciting public input and considering potential impacts on infrastructure and the environment. Explanation. When evaluating the role of government in land use planning in Alabama, developer proposes a large-scale mixed-use project adjacent to a historically significant rural community. The local planning commission is tasked with reviewing the proposal. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing economic development interests with the preservation of community character, environmental concerns, and existing property rights, all within the framework of Alabama's land use planning laws. Careful judgment is required to ensure the planning process is fair, transparent, and legally sound. The best approach involves a comprehensive assessment that prioritizes adherence to the Alabama Code, specifically Title 11, Chapter 10, concerning municipal planning and zoning. This includes a thorough review of the proposal against the adopted comprehensive plan, zoning ordinances, and any specific overlay districts or design guidelines established by the municipality. The Planning Commission must also consider the potential impacts on infrastructure, public services, and the environment, seeking input from relevant state and local agencies as mandated by law. Public hearings, as required by Alabama law, are crucial for gathering community feedback and ensuring due process. This approach ensures that decisions are grounded in established legal frameworks and promote orderly development that serves the public interest. An approach that solely focuses on maximizing tax revenue for the municipality, without adequately considering the comprehensive plan or potential negative externalities, fails to uphold the principles of responsible land use planning as outlined in the Alabama Code. This could lead to development that is incompatible with surrounding areas, strains public resources, and potentially results in legal challenges. Another unacceptable approach would be to dismiss community concerns outright, citing only the developer's economic projections. Alabama land use planning laws emphasize public participation and the consideration of community welfare. Ignoring legitimate concerns raised by residents, especially those related to historical preservation or environmental impact, violates the spirit and letter of these laws and can undermine public trust. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses established procedural requirements, such as failing to conduct proper public notice or hold legally mandated hearings, is a direct violation of Alabama's planning statutes. Such procedural failures can render planning decisions invalid and expose the municipality to litigation. Professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the proposal against all applicable legal requirements and planning principles. This includes understanding the intent behind Alabama's land use laws, which is to guide growth in a manner that promotes public health, safety, and general welfare. Professionals must actively seek and consider all relevant information, including expert reports, environmental assessments, and community input before making a recommendation or decision. Transparency and adherence to due process are paramount throughout the review process. Question 3. The analysis reveals that a proposed commercial development in Baldwin County, Alabama, is adjacent to a significant wetland area that serves as a critical habitat for migratory birds and plays a vital role in local water filtration. The developer has submitted a preliminary site plan that includes some basic stormwater management features, but does not offer a detailed analysis of the potential impact on the wetland's hydrology or biodiversity. The Planning Commission is tasked with reviewing this proposal. Which approach best aligns with Alabama land use planning law and the principles of environmental sustainability in this context? Option A. Mandate a comprehensive environmental impact assessment that specifically evaluates the development's potential effects on wetland hydrology, water quality, and biodiversity, and require the developer to propose detailed, scientifically backed mitigation strategies that meet or exceed state and federal environmental standards before approving the project. Option B. Prove the development based on the developer's assurances that proposed stormwater management features will adequately protect the wetland, given the economic benefits the project is expected to bring to the county. Option C. Grant preliminary approval contingent on the developer conducting a minimal environmental review, focusing primarily on compliance with basic building codes, and deferring detailed wetland impact analysis to a later stage if issues arise. Option D. Reject the proposal outright due to the proximity to the wetland, without allowing the developer an opportunity to present a more thorough environmental assessment or mitigation plan, citing general environmental concerns. The correct answer is A. Mandate a comprehensive environmental impact assessment that specifically evaluates the development's potential effects on wetland hydrology, water quality, and biodiversity, and require the developer to propose detailed, scientifically backed mitigation strategies that meet or exceed state and federal environmental standards before approving the project. Explanation. The analysis reveals a common challenge in Alabama land use planning, balancing development pressures with the imperative of environmental sustainability, particularly concerning the protection of sensitive wetland ecosystems. This scenario is professionally challenging, because it requires a nuanced understanding of Alabama's specific land use statutes and environmental regulations, alongside an ethical obligation to safeguard public resources. The decision-maker must navigate competing interests, including economic development, property rights, and ecological preservation, demanding careful judgment and adherence to established legal frameworks. The best approach involves a comprehensive environmental impact assessment that specifically evaluates the potential effects of the proposed development on the adjacent wetlands, considering factors such as hydrology, biodiversity, and water quality. This assessment should be conducted in accordance with the Alabama Environmental Management Act and relevant federal regulations, such as the Clean Water Act, as administered by state agencies, and inform the Planning Commission's decision-making process by providing objective data on potential risks. This proactive, data-driven method ensures that land use decisions are grounded in scientific evidence and legal compliance, prioritizing the long-term ecological health of the region. An approach that prioritizes immediate economic benefits without a thorough environmental review is professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate the spirit and letter of Alabama's land use planning laws, which mandate consideration of environmental impacts. Such an approach risks irreversible ecological damage, potential legal challenges from environmental groups or affected citizens, and ultimately undermines the sustainable development goals of the state. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to defer solely to the developer's assurances regarding environmental mitigation without independent verification. While developers are responsible for proposing mitigation strategies, the Planning Commission has a duty to critically evaluate these proposals and ensure they meet regulatory standards and effectively address potential environmental harm. Relying solely on developer claims bypasses essential oversight and can lead to inadequate protection of natural resources. Finally, an approach that dismisses the concerns of local environmental advocates without substantive engagement is also professionally unsound. While advocacy groups may have specific viewpoints, their input can highlight critical environmental issues that might otherwise be overlooked. A responsible planning process involves open communication and consideration of all stakeholder perspectives, especially when they raise legitimate environmental concerns supported by evidence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable Alabama land use and environmental laws. This framework should include a mandatory environmental review process, engagement with relevant state and federal environmental agencies, and a transparent process for considering public input. Risk assessment should be central, focusing on identifying potential environmental harms and evaluating the effectiveness of proposed mitigation measures against established legal and scientific benchmarks. Question 4. Comparative studies suggest that land use planners in Alabama often face challenges when federal regulations intersect with local planning authority. Considering a proposed large-scale residential development adjacent to a federally designated wetland area that is known to be a critical habitat for a species listed under the U.S. Endangered Species Act, which approach best ensures compliance with federal land use regulations? Option A. Focus solely on meeting the minimum requirements outlined in Alabama's land use planning statutes, as these are the primary legal framework governing development within the state. Option B. Assume that Alabama's state environmental laws and local zoning ordinances are sufficient to address any potential impacts, as federal regulations are typically applied broadly and rarely impact local development decisions directly. Option C. Rely on the developer's environmental consultant to identify any federal issues without independent verification or direct engagement with federal agencies, assuming the consultant's assessment will be comprehensive and accurate. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the U.S. Endangered Species Act and relevant U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service guidance to determine the precise scope of federal jurisdiction over the proposed development area and its potential impacts, and engage in early consultation with federal agencies regarding mitigation and compliance strategies. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the U.S. Endangered Species Act and relevant U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service guidance to determine the precise scope of federal jurisdiction over the proposed development area and its potential impacts, and engage in early consultation with federal agencies regarding mitigation and compliance strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a land use planner in Alabama to navigate the complex interplay between federal environmental regulations and local land use authority. The challenge lies in identifying the scope of federal authority, particularly concerning endangered species, and understanding how it preempts or influences state and local planning decisions. Misinterpreting the extent of federal jurisdiction can lead to significant legal challenges, project delays, and financial penalties, undermining the integrity of the planning process and potentially harming protected species. Careful judgment is required to balance federal mandates with local planning goals and property rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough assessment of federal laws, specifically the Endangered Species Act (ESSA), to determine if any listed species or critical habitats are present within or adjacent to the proposed development area in Alabama. This approach necessitates consulting federal agency guidance, e.g., U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, reviewing environmental impact statements, and potentially conducting site-specific surveys. If federal jurisdiction is established, the planner must then engage with relevant federal agencies to ensure compliance, which may involve mitigation measures, habitat conservation plans, or modifications to the development proposal. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the potential for federal preemption and ensures adherence to the supreme law of the land as established by the U.S. Constitution and federal statutes like the ESA. It prioritizes legal compliance and environmental protection, which are paramount in land use planning when federal interests are involved. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that Alabama's state land use laws are the sole governing authority and that federal environmental concerns are secondary or can be ignored, unless explicitly mandated by state agencies. This fails to recognize the supremacy clause of the U.S. Constitution, which dictates that federal laws are supreme when they conflict with state laws. Ignoring potential federal jurisdiction under the ESA, for instance, could lead to a project being halted by federal enforcement actions. Another incorrect approach is to solely rely on local zoning ordinances and ignore any potential federal oversight, even when the project might impact federally protected resources. Local ordinances, while important for day-to-day land use, cannot override federal environmental protection laws. This approach risks significant legal repercussions and environmental damage. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial review of federal regulations, only considering broad environmental principles without delving into specific federal statutes like the ESA and their implementing regulations. This superficiality can lead to overlooking critical requirements for consultation, permitting, or mitigation that are essential for federal compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama facing this situation should employ a hierarchical approach to legal and regulatory analysis. First, they must identify all potentially applicable federal laws and regulations that might govern the proposed land use. This involves understanding the scope of federal authority, particularly in areas like environmental protection, interstate commerce, and federal lands. Second, they should assess how these federal requirements interact with Alabama state laws and local ordinances. The principle of federal preemption must be considered, meaning that if a federal law is more stringent or directly conflicts with state or local law, the federal law will prevail. Third, they must proactively engage with relevant federal agencies to understand their requirements and to ensure compliance from the outset of the planning process. This proactive engagement can prevent costly delays and legal challenges. Finally, professionals should document their due diligence and decision-making process thoroughly, demonstrating a commitment to both legal compliance and responsible land use planning. Question 5. The investigation demonstrates that a developer proposes a significant commercial project adjacent to a protected wetland area in Mobile County, Alabama, citing substantial economic benefits for the region. What is the most prudent approach for the County Planning Commission to take in assessing this proposal, considering the potential environmental sensitivities? Option A. Rely on general knowledge of wetland ecosystems to conclude that the development will not cause significant harm, without requiring specific studies or mitigation plans from the developer. Option B. Delegate the entire environmental impact assessment responsibility to the developer, accepting their findings without independent review or further inquiry by the Planning Commission. Option C. Approve the project based on the developer's assurances of minimal environmental impact and the projected economic gains, assuming the wetland's natural resilience will mitigate any unforeseen issues. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental risk assessment that identifies specific ecological impacts, quantifies potential harm to the wetland ecosystem, and proposes detailed mitigation strategies, ensuring compliance with the Alabama Environmental Management Act and local comprehensive plan objectives. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental risk assessment that identifies specific ecological impacts, quantifies potential harm to the wetland ecosystem, and proposes detailed mitigation strategies, ensuring compliance with the Alabama Environmental Management Act and local comprehensive plan objectives. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between promoting economic development and preserving the environmental integrity of a sensitive ecological area within Alabama. Land use planners must balance competing interests, including property rights, community desires, and the long-term sustainability of natural resources, all while adhering to the specific legal framework of Alabama. The risk assessment approach is crucial here to systematically evaluate potential negative impacts and ensure compliance with the Alabama Environmental Management Act and local comprehensive planning ordinances. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves conducting a thorough, multifaceted risk assessment that explicitly considers the potential environmental impacts of the proposed development on the sensitive wetlands. This approach requires identifying specific ecological receptors, e.g., endangered species habitats, water quality, evaluating the likelihood and magnitude of adverse effects from construction and operation, and proposing concrete mitigation measures. This aligns with the principles of comprehensive planning in Alabama, which mandates consideration of environmental factors, and the Alabama Environmental Management Act's emphasis on preventing pollution and protecting natural resources. A comprehensive risk assessment provides the data necessary for informed decision-making and demonstrates due diligence in safeguarding public and environmental interests. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to prioritize the economic benefits of the development without adequately quantifying or addressing the potential environmental degradation. This fails to meet the requirements of Alabama's comprehensive planning process, which necessitates a balanced consideration of all relevant factors, including environmental protection. It also risks violating the Alabama Environmental Management Act by potentially leading to pollution or harm to protected natural resources without proper mitigation. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or general assumptions about the resilience of wetland ecosystems. This lacks the scientific rigor required for a proper risk assessment and bypasses the need for specific data collection and analysis mandated by sound land use planning principles. Such an approach could lead to unforeseen environmental consequences and legal challenges. A further incorrect approach would be to defer all environmental impact analysis to the developer without independent verification or oversight by the planning authority. While developers are responsible for providing information, the planning body has a duty to ensure that this information is comprehensive, accurate, and sufficient to make a responsible land use decision in accordance with Alabama law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, data-driven approach to land use planning. This involves 1. Clearly defining the scope of the project and its potential impacts. 2. Identifying all relevant legal and regulatory requirements, including state and local planning ordinances and environmental laws. 3. Engaging in thorough research and data collection, including environmental impact assessments. 4. Analyzing potential risks and benefits objectively. 5. Developing and evaluating mitigation strategies. 6. Documenting the decision-making process thoroughly. This structured approach ensures that decisions are legally sound, ethically responsible, and promote the long-term well-being of the community and its environment. Question 6. Analysis of a proposed commercial development in Mobile, Alabama, reveals potential impacts on local traffic patterns and a nearby wetland area. The developer has presented preliminary site plans and expressed a desire to expedite the approval process. Which approach best aligns with the established steps in the Alabama land use planning process and minimizes legal and ethical risks? Option A. Proceed with development based on informal discussions with city officials and a commitment from the developer to address traffic and environmental concerns after construction begins. Option B. Approve the development based on the developer's assurances of economic benefit to Mobile, without requiring detailed environmental impact studies or extensive public input. Option C. Schedule a single public meeting to present the developer's plans and gather immediate feedback. Then forward the proposal for approval without further detailed review. Option D. Formally submit the development proposal for review by the Mobile Planning Commission, ensuring all required documentation, including environmental impact assessments and traffic studies, is provided, followed by public hearings and a decision by the City Council in accordance with Alabama Code provisions. The correct answer is D. Formally submit the development proposal for review by the Mobile Planning Commission, ensuring all required documentation, including environmental impact assessments and traffic studies, is provided, followed by public hearings and a decision by the City Council in accordance with Alabama Code provisions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a planner to balance competing interests, the immediate economic benefits of development against the long-term environmental and community well-being. The planner must navigate the inherent tension between private development desires and public interest considerations, all within the specific legal framework of Alabama land use planning. Careful judgment is required to ensure the process is fair, transparent, and legally compliant, avoiding decisions that could lead to legal challenges or undermine public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive and systematic engagement with each step of the land use planning process as mandated by Alabama law. This includes thorough data collection and analysis, robust public participation at all stages, rigorous environmental impact assessment, and adherence to established zoning ordinances and comprehensive plans. Specifically, this approach prioritizes the formal submission of a detailed development proposal that undergoes review by the Planning Commission, followed by public hearings, and a final decision by the governing body, all documented according to Alabama code provisions governing municipal planning and zoning. This method ensures all legal requirements are met, potential impacts are understood, and community input is considered, thereby minimizing legal risk and promoting sustainable development. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves bypassing formal review processes and proceeding with development based on informal assurances from a developer. This fails to comply with Alabama's statutory requirements for land use review, which mandate formal applications, public notice, and hearings. Such an approach risks legal challenges for procedural irregularities and undermines the integrity of the planning process. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize developer requests without adequately considering potential environmental impacts or community concerns. Alabama land use law emphasizes the public interest, which includes environmental protection and community welfare. Ignoring these aspects, even if expedient, can lead to decisions that are later overturned due to non-compliance with environmental review mandates or failure to uphold the public trust doctrine. A third incorrect approach is to limit public input to a single, perfunctory meeting. Effective public participation is a cornerstone of sound land use planning in Alabama. Failing to provide ample opportunities for meaningful engagement and feedback throughout the process, as often required by statute and best practice, can result in decisions that lack community support and are susceptible to legal opposition based on procedural fairness. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama land use planning must adopt a process-driven approach that strictly adheres to the Alabama Code, particularly Title 11, Chapter 95, Municipal Planning and Zoning, and related environmental regulations. This involves understanding that each step in the planning process, from initial application to final approval, serves a specific legal and procedural purpose. A commitment to transparency, thorough documentation, and genuine public engagement is paramount. When faced with competing interests, planners should rely on established legal frameworks and comprehensive plans as guides, ensuring that decisions are defensible, equitable, and serve the long-term interests of the community and the state. Question 7. Consider a scenario where a county planning commission in Alabama is reviewing a proposed large-scale residential development. The commission needs to determine the extent of its authority to impose conditions on the developer related to infrastructure improvements and environmental mitigation, drawing upon the historical development of land use planning laws in Alabama. Which of the following approaches best reflects a legally sound and professionally responsible method for the commission to assess its authority? Option A. Relying solely on the current text of Alabama's land use statutes without investigating the historical context or judicial interpretations that may have shaped their application. Option B. Researching Alabama's specific legislative history concerning planning-enabling acts, zoning ordinances, and relevant state Supreme Court decisions that have interpreted municipal and county authority in land use regulation since the early 20th century. Option C. Prioritizing the developer's economic interests and the potential for increased tax revenue, assuming these factors automatically grant broad discretionary power to approve the project with minimal conditions. Option D. Applying general land use planning principles and best practices commonly adopted in other states, assuming similar legal frameworks. The correct answer is B. Researching Alabama's specific legislative history concerning planning-enabling acts, zoning ordinances, and relevant state Supreme Court decisions that have interpreted municipal and county authority in land use regulation since the early 20th century. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires navigating the historical evolution of land use planning in Alabama, specifically concerning the tension between established property rights and the evolving public interest in environmental protection and orderly development. A planner must understand how past legal precedents and legislative changes have shaped current land use regulations to make informed recommendations. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing interests and ensure compliance with Alabama's specific legal framework. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of Alabama's historical land use planning legislation, including key court decisions that have interpreted these laws. This includes understanding the development of zoning powers, subdivision regulations, and the establishment of planning commissions at both state and local levels. Specifically, examining the period following the standard state zoning enabling act's adoption and its subsequent adaptation and interpretation within Alabama's legal context is crucial. This historical perspective allows for an accurate assessment of the legal basis for current land use controls and the potential legal challenges they might face. This approach is correct because it grounds the decision-making process in the specific legal and historical trajectory of Alabama land use law, ensuring that recommendations are legally sound and reflect the established precedents and statutory authorities within the state. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on general principles of land use planning without considering Alabama's specific historical development. This fails to acknowledge that land use law is not static and that historical legislative actions and judicial interpretations in Alabama have created a unique legal landscape. For instance, ignoring the impact of early Alabama Supreme Court cases that may have defined or limited municipal planning powers would lead to recommendations that are not legally viable within the state. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that current land use regulations are immutable and have always been so. This overlooks the dynamic nature of planning law, where amendments to statutes and new court rulings continually shape the legal environment. Failing to research the historical context of a specific regulation, such as the origins of environmental impact assessments or the evolution of public participation requirements in Alabama planning processes, could lead to recommendations that are either outdated or fail to leverage the full extent of current legal authority. A further incorrect approach would be to prioritize immediate development interests over the established legal framework derived from historical planning efforts. While economic development is a consideration, it must be pursued within the bounds of Alabama's land use laws, which have been shaped by decades of legislative and judicial action. Ignoring this historical legal foundation risks proposing actions that are vulnerable to legal challenge and ultimately detrimental to orderly development. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multi-step approach. 1. Identify the core planning issue and the specific geographic context, Alabama. 2. Conduct historical research into Alabama's land use planning legislation and significant court cases relevant to the issue. 3. Analyze how these historical developments have shaped current statutory authority and legal limitations. 4. Evaluate proposed solutions against this historical and legal backdrop, prioritizing approaches that are consistent with Alabama's established legal framework. 5. Consider the evolving public interest and ensure that recommendations are both legally defensible and promote sustainable and equitable development within the state. Question 8. During the evaluation of a significant commercial development proposal in Mobile County, Alabama, a planner is presented with a developer's argument that strict adherence to certain environmental mitigation requirements outlined in the county's comprehensive plan would significantly delay the project and reduce its profitability. The developer suggests a streamlined review process based on their assurances of future compliance. What is the most professionally responsible approach for the planner to take? Option A. Expedite the review process by accepting the developer's assurances without requiring detailed documentation or independent verification of their mitigation plans. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the proposal against the comprehensive plan and all applicable Mobile County zoning ordinances and environmental regulations, ensuring all mitigation requirements are addressed and documented and facilitating full public input. Option C. Prioritize the developer's financial projections and proposed timeline, recommending approval with a note that the developer will address environmental concerns at a later stage. Option D. Focus solely on the potential economic benefits the development will bring to Mobile County, overlooking detailed environmental and infrastructure impact assessments. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the proposal against the comprehensive plan and all applicable Mobile County zoning ordinances and environmental regulations, ensuring all mitigation requirements are addressed and documented, and facilitating full public input. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate economic interests of a developer with the long-term public welfare and environmental considerations mandated by Alabama's land use planning laws. The planner must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure adherence to established procedures, even when faced with persuasive arguments for expediency. Careful judgment is required to uphold the integrity of the planning process and protect the public interest. The best approach involves a thorough and impartial assessment of the proposed development's impact against the backdrop of the adopted comprehensive plan and relevant zoning ordinances. This includes a detailed review of environmental reports, traffic studies, and infrastructure capacity, as well as opportunities for public input. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the principles of sound land use planning as established by Alabama law, which prioritizes orderly development, protection of natural resources, and the health, safety, and general welfare of the community. Specifically, Alabama Code Title 11, Chapter 105, Planning and Zoning, mandates that local planning commissions consider the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinances when reviewing development proposals. This systematic review ensures that decisions are based on established legal frameworks and community goals, rather than solely on developer-driven justifications. An approach that prioritizes the developer's financial projections and timelines over a comprehensive impact assessment is professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate the core tenets of Alabama's land use planning statutes by potentially allowing development that is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, or that negatively impacts public resources without adequate mitigation. Similarly, an approach that bypasses or minimizes public notification and engagement processes is ethically and legally flawed. Alabama law, through its planning and zoning statutes, emphasizes public participation in land use decisions. Circumventing these requirements undermines transparency and democratic principles and can lead to decisions that do not reflect community needs or concerns. Finally, an approach that relies on informal assurances from the developer without documented evidence or formal commitments for mitigation measures is risky and unprofessional. This can lead to unaddressed environmental or infrastructure problems, creating future liabilities for the municipality and its residents, and failing to uphold the planner's duty to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations. Professional decision-making in similar situations should follow a structured process. First, clearly identify all applicable Alabama land use planning laws, zoning ordinances, and the local comprehensive plan. Second, gather all relevant data and impact assessments, ensuring they are comprehensive and objective. Third, facilitate transparent and robust public engagement. Fourth, conduct an impartial review of the proposal against the established legal and planning frameworks. Finally, make a recommendation or decision that is demonstrably supported by the evidence and consistent with the law and the comprehensive plan, prioritizing the long-term public interest. Question 9. Research into a property owner's request for a zoning variance in Mobile, Alabama, to allow for a commercial use in a historically residential district. A planning commission member informally suggests the owner might be able to proceed without a formal application if they make a significant community contribution. What is the most appropriate course of action for the planning commission member to advise the property owner? Option A. Recommend the property owner proceed with the commercial use, relying on the informal assurance that a formal application may not be necessary if a contribution is made. Option B. Advise the property owner that the request is unlikely to be approved due to the residential nature of the district, and suggest they abandon the variance request without further process. Option C. Advise the property owner to formally apply for a zoning variance or rezoning, ensuring all public notice and hearing requirements under the Alabama Zoning Enabling Act are met. Option D. Suggest the property owner make a substantial, undocumented community contribution to local charities as a prerequisite for informal approval. The correct answer is C. Advise the property owner to formally apply for a zoning variance or rezoning, ensuring all public notice and hearing requirements under the Alabama Zoning Enabling Act are met. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the property rights of an individual landowner with the broader public interest in orderly development and the preservation of community character. As mandated by Alabama's land use planning framework, the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the Alabama Zoning Enabling Act of 1939, ALA, Code Section 11-52-1 et sec., and subsequent case law, which grants municipalities the authority to zone, but also imposes limitations and procedural requirements. A careful risk assessment is necessary to avoid legal challenges and ensure equitable treatment. The best approach involves a thorough review of the existing zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan, followed by a formal application process that includes public notice and hearings. This aligns with the statutory requirements of the Alabama Zoning Enabling Act, which emphasizes due process and public participation. Specifically, ALA. Code Section 11-52-7 requires that zoning ordinances be adopted after public hearing, and ALA. Code Section 11-52-8 outlines the process for amendments, which typically involves notice and a hearing before the Planning Commission and governing body. This methodical approach minimizes the risk of arbitrary or capricious decision-making, which can lead to successful legal challenges based on procedural defects or substantive due process violations under Alabama law. An approach that bypasses formal procedures and relies solely on informal assurances from a planning department official is professionally unacceptable. This fails to adhere to the statutory mandates for public notice and hearings, thereby violating due process rights. Such an action could be challenged as an ultra vires act or a denial of equal protection if other landowners are required to follow the formal process. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to deny the request outright without a clear, legally defensible reason tied to the zoning ordinance or comprehensive plan. While zoning boards have discretion, this discretion must be exercised within the bounds of the law and based on evidence presented. A denial without a rational basis, or one that appears to be based on personal bias or unsubstantiated community opposition, risks being overturned by a court as arbitrary and capricious. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the immediate financial implications for the municipality without considering the long-term impacts on community development and legal precedent is also flawed. While fiscal responsibility is important, land use decisions must be guided by the established planning framework and the public interest, not just short-term revenue considerations. Failure to do so can lead to inconsistent zoning, development that undermines the comprehensive plan, and potential legal liabilities. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to statutory requirements, procedural fairness, and substantive legal justification. This involves understanding the scope of authority granted by the Alabama Zoning Enabling Act, consulting relevant case law, engaging in transparent public processes, and documenting all decisions with clear, evidence-based reasoning. When faced with complex requests, seeking legal counsel is often a prudent step to ensure compliance and mitigate risks. Question 10. Benchmark analysis indicates that a developer in Mobile County, Alabama, proposes a new 150-unit residential development on a 10-acre parcel adjacent to a designated environmentally sensitive wetland area. The current zoning for the parcel is R1, single-family residential. The developer is requesting a rezoning to R3, multifamily residential, to accommodate the higher density. The developer has submitted a preliminary site plan showing a stormwater management system designed to capture 80% of runoff from impervious surfaces, and has stated that no direct construction will occur within the wetland boundary, maintaining a 50-foot buffer. The Mobile County zoning ordinance requires a minimum 100-foot buffer for R3 developments adjacent to environmentally sensitive areas and limits impervious surface coverage to 40% of the total lot area for R3 zoning. The proposed development would result in approximately 55% impervious surface coverage. Which of the following approaches best represents a professional and legally compliant response to this rezoning request? Option A. Recommend approval of the rezoning request, contingent on the developer implementing the proposed stormwater management system and maintaining the 50-foot buffer, assuming the economic benefits outweigh minor ordinance deviations. Option B. Recommend denial of the rezoning request due to the proposed impervious surface coverage exceeding the ordinance limit and the buffer zone being less than the required 100 feet, even with proposed mitigation. Option C. Recommend approval of the rezoning request, provided the developer can demonstrate through a hydrological study that the 50-foot buffer and proposed stormwater system will not negatively impact the wetland, and allow for a variance on the impervious surface limit. Option D. Recommend denial of the rezoning request based solely on the proximity to the wetland, without a detailed analysis of the proposed development's specific impacts or ordinance compliance. The correct answer is B. Recommend denial of the rezoning request due to the proposed impervious surface coverage exceeding the ordinance limit and the buffer zone being less than the required 100 feet, even with proposed mitigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in Alabama land use planning, balancing the desire for economic development with the need to preserve environmental resources and adhere to established zoning regulations. The developer's proposal for a high-density residential project on a parcel adjacent to a protected wetland area raises significant concerns regarding potential impacts on water quality, wildlife habitats, and flood control. Professionals must navigate the complexities of the Alabama planning and zoning law, local ordinances, and potential environmental regulations to make a sound recommendation. The challenge lies in quantifying the potential impacts and determining if the proposed mitigation measures are sufficient to meet legal and ethical standards. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough, data-driven assessment of the proposed development's impact on the adjacent wetland and surrounding environment. This includes conducting a detailed environmental impact study that quantifies potential runoff, sedimentation, and habitat disruption. The analysis should then compare these projected impacts against the requirements of the local zoning ordinance, specifically any provisions related to buffer zones, impervious surface limits, and environmental protection. If the study reveals that the development, even with proposed mitigation, would exceed permissible impact thresholds or violate specific ordinance requirements, the recommendation should be to deny the rezoning request or require substantial modifications to the plan. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core concerns of land use planning, ensuring development is compatible with existing regulations and minimizes negative externalities, particularly concerning sensitive environmental areas as often stipulated in Alabama's planning and zoning law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to approve the rezoning request based solely on the developer's assurances of minimal impact and their proposed mitigation plan without independent verification. This fails to uphold the professional duty to rigorously assess development proposals against established legal standards and environmental protection goals. It bypasses the critical step of quantifying potential harm and ensuring compliance with specific ordinance provisions, potentially leading to environmental degradation and legal challenges. Another incorrect approach is to deny the request outright without a comprehensive impact assessment, simply due to the proximity to the wetland. While caution is warranted, blanket denial without considering the specifics of the proposal and potential mitigation strategies may be overly restrictive and not in line with the balanced approach intended by land use planning laws, which often allow for development under appropriate conditions. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the economic benefits of the development without adequately weighing the environmental risks and regulatory compliance. While economic growth is a consideration, it cannot supersede legal requirements for environmental protection and responsible land use. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Alabama land use planning should adopt a systematic, evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the relevant local zoning ordinances and any applicable state environmental regulations. 2. Requiring a detailed development proposal that includes specific plans for site design, stormwater management, and environmental mitigation. 3. Commissioning or reviewing independent studies to quantify potential environmental impacts, e.g., runoff, habitat loss, water quality degradation. 4. Comparing the projected impacts against the thresholds and requirements set forth in the zoning ordinance and state law. 5. Evaluating the adequacy and feasibility of proposed mitigation measures. 6. Making a recommendation based on whether the development, as proposed or with modifications, can comply with all legal requirements and reasonably protect environmental resources. This structured approach ensures objectivity, transparency, and adherence to the principles of responsible land use planning. Question 11. The evaluation methodology shows a developer proposing a new mixed-use development in a suburban area of Jefferson County, Alabama. Considering the principles of Alabama land use planning law, which of the following approaches best ensures that the proposed development aligns with the county's long-term vision and respects existing property rights? Option A. Expediting the approval process by focusing on administrative efficiency and minimizing public input to quickly accommodate the developer's investment. Option B. prioritizing the developer's financial projections and market demand analysis, assuming these factors inherently align with community growth and development. Option C, approving the development primarily based on the projected increase in local tax revenue for Jefferson County, viewing economic benefit as the paramount consideration. Option D, a comprehensive review of the proposal against the Jefferson County Comprehensive Plan and all applicable zoning ordinances, assessing compatibility with surrounding uses, infrastructure impact, and contribution to community objectives. The correct answer is D, a comprehensive review of the proposal against the Jefferson County Comprehensive Plan and all applicable zoning ordinances, assessing compatibility with surrounding uses, infrastructure impact, and contribution to community objectives. Explanation: the evaluation methodology shows a developer proposing a new mixed-use development in a rapidly growing suburban area of Jefferson County, Alabama. The challenge lies in balancing the developer's economic interests with the county's long-term land use goals, established through its comprehensive plan and zoning ordinances, while respecting existing property rights. This scenario demands careful judgment to ensure compliance with Alabama's land use planning laws, particularly the Alabama Planning and Zoning Law, ALA. Code Section 11-52-1 et sec., and the principles of due process and equal protection. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the proposed development against the Jefferson County Comprehensive Plan and all applicable zoning ordinances. This includes assessing the project's compatibility with surrounding land uses, its impact on infrastructure, roads, utilities, schools, environmental considerations, and its contribution to the community's overall development objectives as outlined in the comprehensive plan. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the statutory mandate for planning and zoning in Alabama, which requires local governments to adopt and implement comprehensive plans and zoning regulations to guide development. Adhering to these established plans and ordinances ensures that development is orderly, consistent, and serves the public interest, thereby upholding property rights by providing predictability and fairness in land use decisions. It also ensures that the Planning Commission and County Commission make decisions based on established criteria, not arbitrary preferences, an approach that prioritizes the developer's immediate financial projections and market demand without a rigorous assessment of the comprehensive plan and zoning compliance is professionally unacceptable. This failure ignores the legal framework established by Alabama law, which mandates that zoning and land use decisions be based on comprehensive planning. Such an approach risks approving developments that are incompatible with the community's character, strain public resources, and potentially lead to legal challenges based on arbitrary or capricious decision-making. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to grant the development approval solely based on the promise of increased tax revenue for Jefferson County. While economic benefits are a consideration, they cannot supersede the legal requirements of the Alabama Planning and Zoning Law. Decisions must be grounded in the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinances, not solely on fiscal impact. Approving a project that violates established land use principles, even for economic gain, undermines the integrity of the planning process and can lead to long-term negative consequences for the community. Finally, an approach that focuses on expediting the approval process to please the developer without adequately engaging the public or conducting necessary impact studies is also professionally flawed. Alabama law emphasizes public participation and due process in land use decisions. Bypassing these procedural safeguards, even with good intentions for efficiency, can lead to decisions that are not well-informed, lack community buy-in, and are vulnerable to legal challenge. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of any proposed development against the governing comprehensive plan and zoning ordinances. This includes understanding the intent and objectives of these documents, identifying potential conflicts or synergies, and assessing impacts on infrastructure, environment, and community character. Engaging in thorough due diligence, seeking expert advice when necessary, and ensuring transparent public engagement are critical steps in making sound and legally defensible land use decisions that serve the long-term interests of the jurisdiction and its residents. Question 12. The assessment process reveals that a developer in Mobile County, Alabama, has submitted a proposal for a large commercial complex that significantly deviates from the current zoning designation for the parcel, which is primarily residential. The developer argues that the project will generate substantial tax revenue and create numerous jobs, and that the Planning Commission should approve it based on these economic benefits. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Planning Department to recommend to the Commission? Option A. Recommend deferring the decision to the Mobile County Commission, stating that the economic implications are beyond the scope of the Planning Department's purview. Option B. Recommend approval of the project based on the developer's projections of increased tax revenue and job creation, as these economic factors are paramount for community growth. Option C. Recommend that the Planning Commission approve the project if a majority of its members find the development aesthetically pleasing and beneficial to the local economy, irrespective of zoning or comprehensive plan alignment. Option D. Recommend a thorough review of the proposal against the Mobile County Comprehensive Plan and the applicable zoning ordinance, assessing its compatibility with existing land use designations, infrastructure capacity, and potential impacts on surrounding residential areas, while also considering the economic benefits presented. The correct answer is D. Recommend a thorough review of the proposal against the Mobile County Comprehensive Plan and the applicable zoning ordinance, assessing its compatibility with existing land use designations, infrastructure capacity, and potential impacts on surrounding residential areas, while also considering the economic benefits presented. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in Alabama land use planning, balancing the immediate economic interests of a developer with the long-term public welfare and established community character, as mandated by Alabama's planning statutes and local ordinances. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating competing interests, interpreting the intent of planning regulations, and making a recommendation that is both legally sound and ethically responsible, considering the potential impact on the community. Careful judgment is required to avoid decisions that could lead to legal challenges or erode public trust in the planning process. The best approach involves a thorough review of the existing zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan for the relevant area in Alabama. This includes assessing whether the proposed development aligns with the established land use designations, density recommendations, and infrastructure capacity outlined in these documents. Furthermore, it requires evaluating the proposal against specific criteria within the zoning ordinance, such as compatibility with adjacent land uses, provision of adequate public services, and potential environmental impacts. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal framework governing land use decisions in Alabama, which emphasizes adherence to adopted plans and ordinances to ensure orderly development and protect public interests. It prioritizes a systematic, evidence-based evaluation grounded in the established legal and planning principles of the state. An approach that prioritizes the developer's financial projections and potential tax revenue without a rigorous assessment of compliance with the zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan is professionally unacceptable. This fails to uphold the legal mandate of planning regulations, which are designed to guide development in a manner that benefits the entire community, not just individual developers. Such an approach risks approving developments that are inconsistent with the community's vision and could lead to negative externalities, such as increased traffic congestion or strain on public services, without adequate mitigation. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to defer the decision solely to the opinion of the Planning Commission members without reference to the established planning documents. While the Commission's input is valuable, their decisions must be rooted in the legal requirements and policy objectives set forth in the zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan. Ignoring these foundational documents undermines the integrity of the planning process and opens the door to arbitrary or politically motivated decisions, which are not permissible under Alabama land use law. Finally, an approach that focuses exclusively on the aesthetic appeal of the proposed development, without considering its legal compliance or broader community impact, is also flawed. While aesthetics can be a component of land use planning, it cannot supersede the fundamental requirements of zoning and comprehensive planning. This approach neglects the critical legal and functional aspects of land use regulation, potentially leading to approvals that are aesthetically pleasing but detrimental to the community's infrastructure, environment, or overall well-being. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the applicable Alabama state statutes and local ordinances. This involves a systematic review of the proposal against the comprehensive plan and zoning regulations, followed by an objective assessment of its potential impacts. engaging with stakeholders, considering expert advice where necessary, and documenting the rationale for any decision are also crucial steps in ensuring a defensible and ethically sound outcome. Question 13. The assessment process reveals that a proposed large-scale agricultural processing facility in rural Greene County, Alabama, is projected to significantly increase truck traffic and wastewater discharge. Local farmers express concern about potential contamination of the Black Warrior River watershed and the impact of increased road wear on their ability to transport goods. The developer, eager to begin construction, proposes a general commitment to environmental best practices and a one-time contribution to a local road repair fund. What is the most professionally responsible approach to addressing these identified impacts under Alabama land use planning law? Option A. Commission a broad, regional environmental study that is not specifically tied to the proposed facility's direct impacts and suggests that any mitigation be handled through general state environmental programs. Option B. Focus primarily on the economic benefits of the facility, such as job creation, and dismiss the farmers' concerns as speculative, proceeding with minimal additional environmental review beyond basic compliance. Option C. Conduct a detailed, site-specific environmental impact study focusing on water quality, soil and air pollution, and develop a comprehensive mitigation plan that includes specific, quantifiable measures for wastewater treatment, real-time water quality monitoring, and a phased road maintenance agreement tied to traffic volume. Option D. Accept the developer's commitment to environmental best practices and the proposed road fund contribution, as these represent a reasonable effort to address potential concerns while prioritizing economic development. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed, site-specific environmental impact study focusing on water quality, soil and air pollution, and develop a comprehensive mitigation plan that includes specific, quantifiable measures for wastewater treatment, real-time water quality monitoring, and a phased road maintenance agreement tied to traffic volume. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a significant challenge in balancing the economic benefits of a proposed industrial development in rural Alabama with its potential environmental and social impacts. The professional challenge lies in navigating the Alabama land use planning law's requirements for impact assessments and mitigation strategies, particularly when faced with competing interests and the need for scientifically sound, yet practically implementable solutions. The developer is pushing for expedited approval, while local residents express concerns about water quality and agricultural land preservation. The best approach involves a comprehensive, data-driven impact assessment that thoroughly analyzes potential effects on water resources, soil, air quality, and local agricultural economies, as mandated by Alabama's planning statutes. This assessment must then inform the development of specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART, mitigation strategies that directly address identified impacts. These strategies should be integrated into the project's design and operational plans, with clear provisions for monitoring and adaptive management to ensure ongoing compliance with state environmental regulations and local zoning ordinances. This approach prioritizes adherence to the spirit and letter of Alabama land use law, which emphasizes responsible development that minimizes harm to existing community resources and ecosystems. An approach that focuses solely on the economic benefits and proposes generic mitigation measures, such as vague commitments to best practices, without specific quantifiable targets or monitoring protocols, fails to meet the detailed requirements of Alabama's impact assessment framework. This is ethically problematic as it risks overlooking or downplaying significant environmental degradation and social disruption, potentially violating the public trust and the state's mandate to protect its natural resources. Another unacceptable approach would be to dismiss local resident concerns as purely NIMBYism and proceed with minimal environmental review, citing only the developer's economic projections. This disregards the legal and ethical obligation to consider community impacts and engage in good faith consultation, which is often an implicit requirement in effective land use planning and can be explicitly or implicitly supported by Alabama's planning statutes that aim for balanced development. Finally, an approach that relies on outdated or incomplete environmental data or proposes mitigation strategies that are not technically feasible or economically viable in the long term would also be professionally unsound. This could lead to non-compliance with environmental standards and necessitate costly remediation later, undermining the project's sustainability and the planning authority's credibility. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the specific requirements of Alabama land use planning law regarding impact assessments and mitigation. This involves identifying all potential impacts, gathering robust scientific data, and engaging in transparent communication with all stakeholders, including the developer, regulatory agencies, and the local community. The focus should be on developing practical, enforceable mitigation measures that are directly linked to identified impacts and are subject to ongoing review and adjustment. Question 14. Which approach would be most appropriate for the City of Mobile Planning Commission to consider when evaluating a proposal for a new mixed-use development that includes both retail spaces and residential apartments, given the existing zoning of the surrounding area is primarily agricultural with some scattered single-family residential zones? Option A. Approve the development immediately due to the potential economic benefits and job creation it would bring to the community. Option B. Determine the most suitable existing zoning classification that can accommodate both commercial and residential uses, or initiate a rezoning process if no single classification adequately fits the proposal, ensuring compliance with the City of Mobile's comprehensive plan and Alabama state land use regulations. Option C. Focus solely on the residential apartment component of the proposal, as residential development is more aligned with the existing zoning patterns in the immediate vicinity. Option D. Reject the development proposal outright because the proposed commercial component is incompatible with the predominantly agricultural zoning of the surrounding area. The correct answer is B. Determine the most suitable existing zoning classification that can accommodate both commercial and residential uses, or initiate a rezoning process if no single classification adequately fits the proposal, ensuring compliance with the City of Mobile's comprehensive plan and Alabama state land use regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the economic development interests of a business with the established land use principles and community character protected by Alabama's zoning ordinances. The Planning Commission must navigate potential conflicts between different zoning classifications and ensure that any proposed development aligns with the long-term vision for the area, as outlined in the local comprehensive plan. Careful judgment is required to avoid setting precedents that could undermine the integrity of the zoning code or negatively impact surrounding properties. The best approach involves a thorough review of the existing zoning ordinance and the comprehensive plan to determine the most appropriate zoning classification for the proposed mixed-use development. This includes assessing whether the proposed commercial and residential components can be integrated harmoniously within a single zoning district, or if a rezoning or special exception is warranted. The Planning Commission should prioritize an approach that aligns with the intent of the Alabama land use planning law, which emphasizes orderly development and the promotion of public health, safety, and general welfare. This often means seeking a zoning classification that best accommodates the proposed uses while minimizing potential negative impacts on adjacent areas, such as increased traffic or noise. An approach that immediately approves the development based solely on its economic benefits fails to consider the regulatory framework established by Alabama law. Zoning ordinances are designed to guide development, not simply react to it. Approving a project without a clear alignment to existing zoning categories or a formal rezoning process bypasses the established legal procedures and can lead to inconsistent land use decisions. Another unacceptable approach would be to reject the development outright without a comprehensive review of its merits against the zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan. While concerns about compatibility are valid, a blanket rejection without exploring potential solutions, such as specific development standards or conditional use permits, may stifle legitimate economic growth and fail to serve the public interest. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the residential aspects and ignores the commercial component would be incomplete. Alabama's zoning laws recognize the need for diverse land uses, and a mixed-use development, if properly planned and regulated, can contribute positively to a community. Ignoring a significant portion of the proposed use would be a failure to engage with the full scope of the development proposal. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the applicant's proposal, then meticulously examining the relevant sections of the Alabama zoning ordinance and the local comprehensive plan. This involves identifying the most suitable existing zoning district, considering the possibility of rezoning or special permits, and evaluating the potential impacts on the surrounding environment and community. Public input should also be solicited and considered throughout the process. Question 15. Investigation of a proposed rezoning application in Jefferson County, Alabama, reveals that a member of the local planning commission has a close personal friendship with the developer seeking the rezoning. The developer has invested significantly in the property and stands to gain substantially if the rezoning is approved. The Planning Commission member is aware of their friendship and the potential financial benefit to their friend. What is the most ethically sound and legally compliant course of action for the Planning Commission member? Option A. Abstain from voting but actively participate in the Commission's discussion, advocating for the rezoning. Option B. Vote in favor of the rezoning without disclosing the friendship, assuming the project is beneficial. Option C. Immediately recuse themselves from any discussion or vote on the rezoning application. Option D. Disclose their friendship to the Commission and then vote on the application, believing transparency is sufficient. The correct answer is C. Immediately recuse themselves from any discussion or vote on the rezoning application. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a developer's financial interests and the public interest in responsible land use planning, as governed by Alabama's statutes. The Planning Commission member's personal relationship with the developer creates a significant ethical dilemma, requiring careful judgment to uphold the integrity of the planning process and public trust. The correct approach involves recusing oneself from any discussion or vote concerning the rezoning application. This aligns with Alabama's ethics laws and principles of good governance, which mandate that public officials avoid conflicts of interest and refrain from participating in matters where their impartiality could be reasonably questioned. By recusing, the Planning Commission member prioritizes the public's right to an unbiased decision-making process over personal relationships, ensuring that the rezoning decision is based solely on the merits of the application and its consistency with the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. This upholds the statutory requirement for fair and impartial land use decisions. An incorrect approach would be to disclose the relationship and then proceed to vote, arguing that transparency negates the conflict. This fails to address the core issue of compromised impartiality. Even with disclosure, the appearance of impropriety remains, potentially undermining public confidence in the Planning Commission's decisions and violating the spirit, if not the letter, of Alabama's ethics regulations concerning conflicts of interest. Another incorrect approach would be to vote in favor of the rezoning without disclosing the relationship, believing that the developer is a friend and the project is beneficial. This is a direct violation of ethical obligations and potentially Alabama law, as it involves undisclosed self-dealing or favoritism, leading to a decision that may not be in the best interest of the community and is tainted by a personal bias. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to abstain from voting but still participate in the discussion, advocating for the rezoning. While abstaining from voting avoids a direct conflict in that specific action, participating in the discussion while having a personal stake still creates an appearance of undue influence and bias, compromising the integrity of the deliberative process and failing to fully remove oneself from the conflict of interest. Professionals in land use planning must adopt a proactive approach to identifying and managing potential conflicts of interest. This involves a thorough understanding of applicable ethics laws and regulations, a commitment to transparency, and a willingness to recuse oneself when impartiality is compromised. The decision-making process should prioritize the public good and the integrity of the planning process above personal relationships or potential benefits. Question 16. In Alabama, a planning commissioner is reviewing an application for a zoning variance that would significantly increase the property value of a commercial building, where the commissioner holds a substantial, undisclosed financial interest through a minority ownership stake in a leasing company. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach for the planning commissioner to take regarding this zoning variance application? Option A. Immediately declare the financial interest and recuse themselves from all discussions and voting on the variance application. Option B. Participate fully in the discussion and debate, but abstain from casting a vote on the variance application. Option C. Vote against the variance, viewing it as a way to avoid any appearance of impropriety related to their financial interest. Option D. Vote in favor of the variance, believing the economic benefits to the community outweigh the personal gain. The correct answer is A. Immediately declare the financial interest and recuse themselves from all discussions and voting on the variance application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a planning commissioner in Alabama due to the inherent conflict of interest and the potential for undue influence on a zoning variance decision. The commissioner's personal financial stake in a business that would directly benefit from the variance creates an ethical dilemma. Alabama's Sunshine Law and ethical codes for public officials mandate impartiality and the avoidance of situations where private interests could compromise public duty. The integrity of the zoning process, which relies on objective application of criteria, is at stake. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recusing oneself from any discussion or vote on the variance request. This approach upholds the principle of impartiality and avoids even the appearance of impropriety. Alabama law and ethical guidelines for public officials require that individuals with a direct or indirect financial interest in a matter before a governmental body abstain from participating in its consideration or decision-making. This ensures that decisions are made based on the merits of the application and the public interest, rather than personal gain. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to vote in favor of the variance, arguing that the personal benefit is minimal or that the business will create jobs. This is ethically and legally unacceptable because it prioritizes personal financial interest over the duty of impartiality. It violates the spirit and letter of Alabama's ethics laws, which aim to prevent conflicts of interest and maintain public trust in governmental processes. Such a decision could be challenged as arbitrary and capricious, and potentially illegal. Another incorrect approach is to vote against the variance solely because of the personal business interest, without considering the merits of the application itself. A recusal is the correct action. Voting against it based on the conflict rather than the planning criteria is also problematic. Zoning decisions must be based on established legal standards and planning principles, not on personal feelings or attempts to correct a perceived conflict by an arbitrary vote. This approach still involves participation in a matter where a conflict exists and does not adhere to the objective decision-making required by zoning law. A further incorrect approach is to abstain from voting but remain present and participate in the discussion, offering opinions and arguments for or against the variance. While abstaining from the vote is a step towards addressing the conflict, actively participating in the deliberation process, when one has a personal stake, can still create the appearance of undue influence and compromise the impartiality of the discussion. The goal is to remove oneself entirely from the decision-making process to ensure fairness and public confidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should first identify any potential conflicts of interest, whether direct or indirect, financial or personal. They should then consult the relevant state ethics laws and local ordinances governing public officials and planning commission members, specifically regarding conflicts of interest and recusal. If a conflict is identified, the professional course of action is to formally declare the conflict and recuse themselves from all aspects of the matter, including discussion and voting. If unsure, seeking guidance from legal counsel or the relevant ethics commission is advisable. The paramount consideration is maintaining the integrity and fairness of the public decision-making process. Question 17. System analysis indicates that a property owner in Mobile County, Alabama, has been operating a small, independent auto repair shop on their land for the past 30 years. This use predates the recent adoption of a new county zoning ordinance that designates this parcel for exclusively residential development. The owner has invested significantly in maintaining and upgrading the shop over the years, including replacing the roof and updating some of the diagnostic equipment. The county planning department is now reviewing the property's status under the new ordinance. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the county planning department to take regarding the auto repair shop? Option A. Immediately issue a notice of violation and require the auto repair shop to cease operations within 90 days, as its current use is no longer permitted under the new residential zoning ordinance. Option B. Require the property owner to immediately convert the auto repair shop into a residential dwelling, offering no consideration for their past investment or the established nature of their business. Option C. Grant the auto repair shop an indefinite exemption from the new zoning ordinance, allowing it to continue operating without any further review or conditions, simply because it existed prior to the ordinance's adoption. Option D. Conduct a detailed review of the property's history and the nature of the auto repair business to determine if it qualifies for non-conforming use status under Alabama law, considering factors such as continuous operation, substantial investment, and lack of abandonment, before making any determination on its future. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed review of the property's history and the nature of the auto repair business to determine if it qualifies for non-conforming use status under Alabama law, considering factors such as continuous operation, substantial investment, and lack of abandonment, before making any determination on its future. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in Alabama land use planning where a long-standing, but now non-conforming, use of property clashes with a newly adopted zoning ordinance. The professional challenge lies in balancing the property owner's vested rights and investment-backed expectations with the public interest in implementing the new zoning plan. A hasty or uninformed decision can lead to costly litigation, damage community trust, and undermine the integrity of the zoning ordinance. Careful judgment is required to interpret and apply Alabama's specific nonconforming use provisions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the Alabama Code, specifically sections pertaining to nonconforming uses and grandfathering provisions. This includes examining the nature of the existing use, its legality at the time it commenced, and whether it has been substantially altered or abandoned in a manner that would extinguish its nonconforming status. The process should involve consulting relevant local zoning ordinances and any applicable case law from Alabama courts that interpret these statutes. This approach ensures adherence to the established legal framework, respects the property owner's rights while upholding the municipality's authority to regulate land use, and provides a defensible basis for the decision. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately demand cessation of the use based solely on its nonconformity with the new zoning ordinance. This fails to acknowledge Alabama's grandfathering provisions, which protect existing, lawful uses from immediate termination. Another incorrect approach is to grant an indefinite exemption without any review or consideration of whether the use has been maintained or has undergone substantial changes that might jeopardize its nonconforming status. This disregards the intent of zoning to guide future development and can lead to the perpetuation of uses that are detrimental or obsolete. Finally, making a decision based on personal opinion or community pressure, without grounding it in the specific legal requirements of Alabama's nonconforming use statutes, is a significant ethical and professional failure. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the relevant legal framework, Alabama Code, local ordinances. They should then gather all pertinent facts about the use in question, including its history, legality at inception, and any changes over time. This factual information must then be rigorously applied to the legal standards. If ambiguity exists, seeking legal counsel or clarification from the relevant municipal attorney is a crucial step. Transparency with the property owner throughout the process is also vital. Question 18. The monitoring system demonstrates an increase in impervious surface area within the proposed development site in Mobile County, Alabama. The developer has submitted a stormwater management plan that includes a detention pond. The Planning Commission is reviewing this plan, considering its compliance with Alabama's stormwater management and floodplain regulations. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance and protects public interest? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the developer's stormwater management plan to ensure it meets or exceeds the requirements outlined in the Alabama Handbook for Erosion Control, Sediment Control, and Stormwater Management on construction sites and local floodplain ordinances, verifying that runoff will be adequately detained, infiltrated, and treated to minimize downstream impacts and flood risk. Option B. Accept the stormwater management plan without in-depth analysis, assuming that the presence of a detention pond inherently satisfies regulatory requirements for stormwater management. Option C. Delegate the entire review and approval of the stormwater management plan to a single county engineer, trusting their judgment without further commission deliberation. Option D. Approve the stormwater management plan based on the developer's assurance that it will mitigate any potential issues, prioritizing the economic benefits the development will bring to Mobile County. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of the developer's stormwater management plan to ensure it meets or exceeds the requirements outlined in the Alabama Handbook for Erosion Control, Sediment Control, and Stormwater Management on construction sites and local floodplain ordinances, verifying that runoff will be adequately detained, infiltrated, and treated to minimize downstream impacts and flood risk. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate needs of a development project with the long-term environmental protection mandated by Alabama's stormwater management and floodplain regulations. The Planning Commission must ensure compliance with state and local ordinances while also considering the potential impacts on downstream properties and ecosystems. Careful judgment is required to avoid approving a project that could lead to increased flood risk or water quality degradation. The best approach involves a thorough review of the developer's submitted stormwater management plan, specifically scrutinizing its adherence to the Alabama Handbook for Erosion Control, Sediment Control, and Stormwater Management on construction sites and relevant local floodplain ordinances. This includes verifying that the plan adequately addresses detention, infiltration, and treatment of stormwater runoff to mimic pre-development hydrology and minimize downstream impacts. The plan must also demonstrate compliance with floodplain development standards, ensuring that the proposed construction will not obstruct flood flows or increase flood elevations within designated floodplains. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core requirements of Alabama's land use planning laws concerning stormwater and floodplains, prioritizing environmental protection and public safety as mandated by statute and regulation. An approach that focuses solely on the economic benefits of the development and assumes the developer's plan is adequate without independent verification fails to uphold the Planning Commission's duty to protect public welfare and the environment. It overlooks the potential for increased flood damage to adjacent properties and the degradation of water quality, which are direct violations of regulatory intent. Another unacceptable approach is to approve the project based on a cursory review of the stormwater plan, particularly if it appears complex or time-consuming to analyze. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to apply the required level of scrutiny mandated by Alabama law. It risks approving a plan that is insufficient to mitigate the environmental impacts, leading to potential future liabilities and regulatory noncompliance. Finally, deferring the entire review process to a single county engineer without broader commission oversight is problematic. While the engineer's expertise is valuable, the Planning Commission has a collective responsibility to ensure all legal and environmental considerations are met. This delegation can lead to a narrow focus and may miss broader community impacts or policy implications that the Commission is tasked with considering. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and applying the specific requirements of Alabama's stormwater and floodplain regulations. This involves a systematic review of all submitted documentation against established legal standards, seeking expert consultation when necessary, and considering the cumulative impacts of development on the local environment and community. Transparency and adherence to due process are paramount. Question 19. Market research demonstrates a significant demand for new commercial development in rural Baldwin County, Alabama. A developer, eager to capitalize on this opportunity, has approached your firm seeking guidance on navigating the Alabama planning and zoning law and any relevant environmental regulations to expedite the approval process. The developer is concerned about potential delays and wants to explore strategies to secure preliminary commitments from local officials before formally submitting plans. What is the most legally sound and ethically responsible approach for your firm to advise the developer? Option A. Focus the firm's efforts solely on quantifying the economic benefits of the proposed development and presenting these figures to local officials, downplaying potential environmental concerns until they are explicitly raised by regulatory bodies. Option B. Recommend that the developer engage in informal discussions with individual members of the Baldwin County Commission and Planning Commission to gauge their support and secure informal assurances before submitting a formal application. Option C. Suggest submitting a preliminary, incomplete application to the Baldwin County Planning Commission, highlighting the developer's urgent timeline and requesting an expedited review process based on potential economic benefits. Option D. Advise the developer to meticulously prepare a complete application package, including all required site plans, environmental impact assessments, and adherence to public notice requirements, and then formally submit it to the Baldwin County Planning Commission and relevant state agencies for review according to established procedures. The correct answer is D. Advise the developer to meticulously prepare a complete application package, including all required site plans, environmental impact assessments, and adherence to public notice requirements, and then formally submit it to the Baldwin County Planning Commission and relevant state agencies for review according to established procedures. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the economic interests of a developer with the established legal framework for land use planning in Alabama, specifically the Alabama Planning and Zoning Law (ALA), Code Section 11-52-1 et sec., and the Alabama Environmental Management Act (ALA), Code Section 22-22A1 et sec. A developer's desire for expedited approval must be weighed against the statutory requirements for public notice, due process, and environmental review, all of which are designed to protect public health, safety, and welfare. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance while also facilitating responsible development. The best professional approach involves proactively engaging with the relevant local planning commission and county commission, providing all necessary documentation in advance of any formal submission, and meticulously adhering to the public notice requirements as stipulated by Alabama law. This includes ensuring that all affected property owners are notified and that public hearings are properly advertised. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the procedural safeguards mandated by Alabama's planning and zoning law, which emphasizes public participation and due process in land use decisions. It also demonstrates a commitment to transparency and compliance with environmental review processes, thereby minimizing the risk of legal challenges and ensuring a smoother, more legitimate approval process. An approach that bypasses the standard public notice procedures and attempts to secure informal commitments from individual commission members before a formal application is submitted is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the statutory requirements for public notification and hearing, undermining the principles of due process and public transparency enshrined in Alabama law. It also creates an appearance of impropriety and can lead to legal challenges based on procedural defects. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to submit an incomplete application and then argue for expedited review based on the developer's timeline. This disregards the statutory requirements for a complete application and the established review processes. It places an undue burden on the Planning Commission and can lead to rushed decisions that may not adequately consider all relevant factors, potentially violating the spirit and letter of Alabama's land use laws. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the economic benefits of the project without adequately addressing potential environmental impacts or community concerns is also professionally unsound. While economic development is a consideration, Alabama law requires a comprehensive review that includes environmental considerations and the broader public interest. Failure to do so can result in project delays, costly mitigation measures, or outright denial due to unaddressed environmental or community objections. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adhering to the specific statutory requirements of Alabama's land use and environmental laws. This involves thorough research of applicable statutes and local ordinances, proactive engagement with regulatory bodies, meticulous documentation, and a commitment to transparent public processes. When faced with competing interests, the framework should guide towards solutions that are legally compliant, ethically sound, and promote sustainable development that benefits the community. Question 20. Market research demonstrates that a developer proposing a new residential community in Baldwin County, Alabama, is seeking to minimize upfront costs. The developer has presented a preliminary budget that excludes detailed environmental impact studies and associated mitigation measures, arguing that these can be addressed during the construction phase if issues arise. County Planning Commission needs to evaluate the financial feasibility of this project, while ensuring compliance with Alabama land use planning principles that emphasize environmental sustainability. If the total projected revenue from lot sales is $50,000,000, and the estimated cost of construction without environmental mitigation is $35,000,000,000. What is the maximum allowable budget for environmental mitigation and associated costs to ensure a minimum profit margin of 20% on the total project revenue, assuming the developer's initial cost estimates are accurate? Option A, $5,000,000,000. Option B, $10,000,000,000. Option C, $3,000,000,000. Option D, $7,000,000,000. The correct answer is C, $3,000,000,000. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing economic development interests with the long-term environmental health and sustainability goals mandated by Alabama land use planning law. Developers often prioritize maximizing profit, which can lead to proposals that strain local infrastructure or negatively impact natural resources. Planners and local officials must navigate these competing interests, ensuring that development aligns with the state's commitment to environmental stewardship as outlined in Alabama Code Title IX, Chapter 11, Conservation, and relevant county zoning ordinances. The challenge lies in quantifying potential environmental impacts and integrating them into a financially viable development plan, requiring a sophisticated understanding of both economic principles and environmental regulations. The best approach involves a proactive and data-driven assessment of environmental impacts integrated into the initial planning stages. This means conducting a thorough environmental impact study, EIS, that quantifies potential negative effects on water quality, biodiversity, soil erosion, and air quality. The study should then propose specific mitigation measures and, crucially, calculate the associated costs of these measures. These costs should be factored into the overall project budget and potentially offset by identifying opportunities for environmental enhancements that could increase property values or attract eco-conscious buyers. For instance, incorporating green infrastructure like permeable pavements or bioswales can reduce stormwater runoff and associated treatment costs, while preserving natural habitats can enhance the aesthetic appeal and recreational value of the development. This approach directly addresses the Alabama Code's emphasis on responsible resource management and sustainable development by embedding environmental considerations into the economic feasibility analysis from the outset. An approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings by deferring environmental mitigation until later stages is professionally unacceptable. This failure to conduct a comprehensive EIS upfront violates the spirit and letter of Alabama land use planning laws, which require consideration of environmental consequences. Such a delay often leads to more expensive and less effective remediation efforts later, potentially resulting in legal challenges and fines. Furthermore, it demonstrates a disregard for the long-term ecological health of the region, which is a core responsibility of land use planners. Another unacceptable approach is to solely rely on generalized environmental best practices without specific, quantifiable data relevant to the proposed site in Alabama. While general knowledge is useful, Alabama's diverse ecosystems and specific environmental challenges, e.g., coastal erosion, karst topography, necessitate site-specific analysis. Failing to conduct this detailed assessment means potential impacts might be underestimated or entirely overlooked, leading to non-compliance with local zoning ordinances and state environmental regulations. Finally, an approach that dismisses environmental concerns as purely an aesthetic issue or a minor inconvenience, without attempting to quantify their economic implications, is also professionally flawed. Environmental degradation can have significant economic consequences, including decreased property values, increased costs for water treatment, and potential loss of tourism revenue. Ignoring these quantifiable impacts demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold the principles of sustainable land use planning as envisioned by Alabama law. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape in Alabama, including state environmental laws and local zoning ordinances. This should be followed by a comprehensive assessment of potential environmental impacts. Using quantitative data and expert analysis, the costs of mitigation and the potential economic benefits of sustainable practices must then be integrated into the project's financial model. This iterative process ensures that development is not only economically viable, but also environmentally responsible and compliant with all legal requirements.